First one to pass out buys a beer tonight.
You're on.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today, we're going to be talking about the AAA champion Sugar Land Space Cowboys, who I got to see win that championship at the AAA championship game in Las Vegas. Later on in this episode, I will be joined by my friend Jay Hollenbeck, who is with the Space Launch System at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. And we'll be joined by NASA historian Jennifer Ross Nazal at the Johnson Space Center in the greater Houston area. And of course, Dan Simon of Studio Simon will be here with one of his Studio Simon stumpers. Right now, I am so pleased to welcome to Baseball by Design Tyler Stamm, who is the general manager for the Sugar Land Space Cowboys. Tyler, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Paul. Doing well. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk through this with you.
I am really excited to be talking about this brand. This is a really interesting one for me because it came about right at about that time of transition for minor league baseball. Certainly a time of transition for this franchise, moving from being an independent team to being all the way up to being a AAA team, rebranding from a sort of wacky mosquito-based cartoon, anthropomorphic cartoon mosquito, to a really elegant and sophisticated, high-level brand based on the space industry. So, with all of that sort of as background here, I'll start with a real basic question. How come a team in Sugar Land, Texas is called the Space Cowboys?
So I think the big thing for us was kind of moving into the future, right? So we were an independent team for 10 years, and then taking that next step, right, being purchased by the Astros. How do we not forget the past, but move into that future, tie ourselves into the Astros brand, tie ourselves into the Houston area, right? Western space kind of ties into our Southern Texas roots. So that was really the thought behind it. There were a few team names that came about, but Space Cowboys always seemed to be the one that stuck the most, just because it fit that narrative, like you talked about. Skeeters is kind of a weird, right? Like, I love weird minor league names. And so Space Cowboys, although even at first it felt like a mouthful, it's just a goofy name, right? There's no other team called the Space Cowboys. So I like stuff like that. And so that's what we rolled with.
You have been with this team since 2012, so you have lived and breathed both iterations of this identity, a wacky independent team, and now a much more sort of sophisticated AAA brand. How has that change been for you personally as the general manager of a team that went through such a big transition?
I think at first it was pretty hard, right? Because when you work in minor league baseball, your team identity almost becomes a part of your identity, right? So I have endless Skeeters gear still in my closet in my house, all kinds of stuff. I've still got Skeeters gear here in my office, but it was hard at first just because it felt like a piece of me was moving on, right? But now, 3 years into this transition and being a space cowboy, right? Like, I'm cool with where we're at. I love our brand. I love what we're doing now, and I feel like the name itself has helped us take that next step. There's a lot of things that we do a lot better than we used to. It's not to say I don't miss some of the independent ball stuff, but we're better because of it. And I think the Space Cowboys brand like kind of helped us move in that direction as well.
It could have been really silly, right? Like Space Cowboys could have lent itself to a really silly sort of visual brand, and the team went a different direction. Went with like I said, I've used the word sophisticated. It's still an astronaut in a cowboy hat, but the colors are relatively understated, and there's no big smiling face. It's sort of a shielded visor with stars reflected in it. What was the sort of organizational thinking in the approach to the visual brand that they took?
So the good thing about being an Astros owned affiliate now is that we have a lot of help, right? So the Astros kind of took this on their own, right? And so they were asking for guidance, asking our opinions, didn't forget that we existed down here and have our own thoughts, and are running it day to day. But they were, key in designing everything, picking the colors, themes, things like that. And the overarching kind of design process was, how do we tie this in and make it feel like an Astros affiliate? So you see a lot of these color tones, like we have an orange, right? But it's not Astros orange. We have a blue, but it's not Astros blue. So that was kind of the thought behind it. And again, I don't know how else, like I can't visually imagine. I know you said a goofy logo. I can't imagine how else we would have done it. I know we wanted the Space Cowboy to look strong, rustic, spacey. So I think they captured it really well. There were a few iterations of the actual logo, and most of them had a visor the entire time. I think we wanted him to have some sort of mystery to him, so that we didn't identify him as a person and more of like a hero.
The interesting thing on the team's website is they you all have identified the origin of the colors as coming from a photo of the horizon of the Earth as seen from space. And you've got this a light blue, a navy, an orange, a gray, and a black that, based on the photo that's actually on the website, look like they were extracted directly from that photograph. That's a cool
They were.
origin story for that color palette. And it's unusual for, I think, a minor league baseball team to have that sort of origin story for a color palette. Where, can you talk about that process? What was that process like for you to derive those colors from a photograph?
So not to get too deep, but it was right. The next horizon for us was, what is on the horizon is AAA. What is on the horizon is being an Astros affiliate, and it just naturally tied into, hey, these colors are really cool. Because they're originally the Space Cowboy, right? We're figuring out, are there green elements, are there red elements, and then the horizon popped up, and it just became a natural fit of, hey, that blue is going to be his bandana. We're going to have some orange undertones in his cowboy hat, and that really worked well together, and obviously tied in super well to the space theme. So that's what we went with.
We've talked about the space theme a couple of times. This might be obvious, I think, for people who are familiar with NASA and their presence in the Houston area. But eh, can you explain organizationally why it was important for you all, not just being an Astros affiliate, but because of where you play, why it was important to double down on that space theme?
I mean, space is a marquee element of the Houston area. And while we're not directly in Houston, we're a part of the greater Houston metro. So I think that was a kind of cool tie-in. And if you look down here, right, I mean, there's the Houston Rockets, Houston Astros, the Houston Dynamo, and then there's the Texans. So, but even that, like the Texans is kind of your Western, right? So, I mean, it's just a very space-driven town. It's not a part of our everyday life down here, but it's a part of who we are in this area. So I think that kind of definitely parlayed into us being the Space Cowboys instead of just the Sugar Land Cowboys, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And, well, we've talked so much about the space theme, but yeah, I mean, you mentioned the cowboy aspect of things is also important to the region too. So did it feel at any point like it was difficult to merge those two things?
I mean, we're still working on that, right? Because I think space kind of naturally is a little bit cooler, right? A little bit more mysterious. So we kind of tend to gravitate towards space organizationally. And so we're working on, hey, how can we make sure we have Western elements? So like we did a belt buckle giveaway last year. We named our playground the Kitty Corral. We're trying to make sure that Western element is not lost. So we're working at it all the time. Like, hey, we're doing too many space things right now. Let's make sure we're doing some Western elements in our game day production or our giveaways or whatever it is we're doing. And so that's not lost. But I feel like even with our messaging, even this year, it's super space themed. Last year was very Western themed. Our slogan last year was ready to ride. So it was kind of like, hey, jump on your horse, let's ride, let's go. And this year is set the course, which is kind of, and there's a lot of space elements in our branding this year. So I think it's just that ebb and flow of finding what mood we're in the moment and not forgetting about the other one. So yes, it's difficult to figure out which path we want to go and make sure we're doing both.
You play in the Pacific Coast League, which has the Salt Lake Bees, It has the Albuquerque Isotopes. It has the El Paso Chihuahuas. There are some teams that have more serious brands as well, but it's notable to me that, and you already mentioned how this brand was developed in-house with the Astros new ownership, not developed by one of the big firms that you often see, a Brandios or a Dan Simon or a Sky Dillon or Ryan Foose. Obviously, an intentional decision from the Astros and from you all organizationally.
Yep.
Why was that important to you?
I think just having full control of everything we do is kind of how the Astros like to do things, right? We have a lot of very smart people, and as a part of our organization, whether that's at Minute Maid, Sugar Land, and Corpus, and Fayetteville, or at their facility in Florida in West Palm. So it's a big company, and we all use each other, right, to help grow the entire business. So, not to say that we didn't need help, but we've got enough help here. And so giving us that full direction and full autonomy to do whatever we want with the logo, with the brand was helpful. I think there is kind of a no-brainer just for us to handle it all on our own. Same thing with our Copa branding, right? So we did all of that here in Houston and Sugar Land. We've got very talented people and we can handle the big stuff ourselves.
There's a lot of sort of alternate marks in this brand. Obviously, the main one features the Space Cowboy himself with his blast shield and the space dust reflected in it. There's an SL for Sugarland, and it has the big sort of starburst reflecting off the letter L. My favorite is the Mission Patch logo. I really like that one a lot. I
I
own
too.
that on a dad hat, even though I'm a Phillies fan and your Astros beat my Phillies in the World Series in 2022. And then obviously there's a type-based logo, a word mark that has the starburst and the a line sort of reflecting across the horizon. Throughout each of these logos, the unifying factor is that starburst. What's the significance of the starburst?
So the star is basically right looking. I think it was back to the North Star, right?
Oh,
Is messaging that we got like, hey, you're guiding light. And so that's kind of like our guiding light to everything we do. So I don't know if you've seen our faux back from this year that we did, but that has basically our starburst. It's obviously redesigned, but that star is in everything that we do. It's our North Star, guides us forward.
I mentioned that I like the Mission Patch logo the best. Is there one that you're seeing purchased the most in the team store, or that you see, fans wearing around the ballpark? Is there one that you think is a sort of runaway favorite?
Yeah, so our alt is outside of the primary identity is the most popular. The rocket ship, people call it, but it's our mission patch, and that is by far our most popular cap outside of the primary.
I think one of the reasons I like it, and I mean this as a compliment, it looks like if you were to take the Futurama Planet Express logo and make
I
it
could
like a
see that.
serious logo, it would look like that. It's kind of it's a really, yeah, I think people like rockets in logos, so I think you're
I
absolutely
can
right
see
about that.
that. I think what helps it really resonate though is it has the Texas flag style look, right? So we're very proud of our state down here, and so I think that really helps push it forward down here.
All right, Tyler, before I get you out of here, I'm curious to know, you were there for the Skeeters and you saw how that performed in terms of sales. Now that you're with the Space Cowboys, this team's been around since 2021. How has it been doing in terms of merchandise? How has the distribution, how's the reception been from fans, not just in the area, but around the country?
I mean, around the country, huge, right? I mean, we took a probably 10x step in sales year over year, going from Skeeters to Space Cowboys. It's still a very high performing brand. I think too. I mean, we've got so many cool things, right? We've got our Marvel logo that Marvel did for us a couple years ago. That's I actually looked this up yesterday for somebody else. It's the 10th highest selling item on milbshop.com. Our primary cap is like the third or fourth highest selling cap in all of minor league baseball. So it's a brand that doesn't, people who are not from here don't even really know who we are necessarily. Still looks great, right? So people are buying it, and retail is a big part of what we do now because of the brand. The brand's really driven that.
That is really fantastic. And it's a really fun logo. It's a fantastic logo. I really enjoy it. And congratulations on that success. Tyler, where can people find the team or you on online and on social media?
Yeah, check us out at slspacecowboys.com. Grab your tickets. Come see us at Constellation Field. Kick off next year in 2025 in March.
Fantastic. Tyler, thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I can't tell you how excited I am to have Jay Hollenbeck back on the podcast. You may remember a couple of years ago when we featured the Rocket City Trash Pandas on the Baseball by Design podcast. I was so lucky to have Jay Hollenbeck, who is, I got a long title for you here, Jay, the Deputy Hardware Manager of the NASA Space Launch System, upper stage for the Artemis program. Jay, welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, doing great, Paul. Thanks for having me. And again, that's why you realize we have acronyms in NASA, because that takes forever to put that on a business card or even say that to somebody that you can be out in public.
So this is so much fun, not only because we're getting to talk about another space-themed minor league baseball team, but guess what? You're here in Denver on work. What you said it was? What is it that you're doing here? Something?
Yeah, so we're actually doing the final acceptance review for the Artemis 3 upper stage for SLS. Just happened to be in town in Denver, which is where United Launch Alliance is based out of, and just happened to run into you.
Well, I don't know if we happened to run into each other. I made the drive down from Fort Collins. You made the drive up from Centennial. We're here in the shadow of Coors Field. We're in Denver at a restaurant that I like to go to whenever I go to a ball game at Coors Field. I am so thrilled to be talking to you in person about the Sugar Land Space Cowboys, but also just hanging out, watching. You may hear it in the background here. We're watching Game 5 of the World Series right now. Game 5, tied 5-5. So fives are wild right now.
And it's getting exciting right now.
It is exciting. We've got Dodgers fans and Yankees fans in this restaurant watching the game as well. So it has definitely been fun. But we are not here to talk about the World Series, because by the time this drops, the World Series is going to be long over. We are here to talk about the Sugar Land Space Cowboys. I should point out, too, for those of you who don't remember from the Rocket City Trash Pandas episode, you're a college ball player. Baseball is not new to you. You played for Millsaps College, still hold the record, the single-season win-loss record for a pitcher at 9-1 your junior year, which would have been 2007, I guess.
Around that time.
All right. So
Don't date me, though.
So you're a NASA scientist, NASA engineer, but also a ball player, and we have been to a Trash Pandas game together. We have talked baseball. We've gotten to hang out. But for right now, we are talking about the Sugar Land Space Cowboys. Their logo is an astronaut character, as we have discussed on this episode already. Their logo is an astronaut character. He's wearing a cowboy hat and a bandana. You're, being a NASA engineer here, can you comment on how that would work with the spacesuits that you know in your work with NASA?
So, well, right off the bat, you better make sure that head bucket fits around that space helmet. Because the first thing that's going to happen when you're in space with a cowboy hat, that thing's just going to float off, right? It's going to float off. Newton's first laws of physics is going to say that cowboy hat's going to continue going on until something else hits it. So, yeah, you definitely got to do something about that. That bandana, too, you're going to just be fighting it the whole time. It's going to want to do whatever it wants to do. You're going to be like swatting mosquitoes in a swamp, right? So the one thing, though, that we do have as a spinoff from NASA is Velcro. So I think if we get some Velcro and a right-sized bucket hat, I think we can make it work.
All right. But if not, that hat could be humanity's first ever contact with an alien species.
It could be.
It could just float off into the cosmos, and we're going to have aliens show up wearing cowboy hats.
Saying howdy, right?
Saying howdy. Which would be appropriate in Sugar Land, of course, just outside of Houston. You, of course, are not based there at the Johnson Space Center, which is the closest space center to the Sugar Land Space Cowboys. You're in Alabama.
That's correct. Huntsville, Rocket City.
Rocket City, where you and I went to a Trash Pandas game with our friend Dan Simon, of course, who will be on later on in this episode. We didn't really get a chance to talk about this at the ball game because we were watching the ball game, but the notion of a sports mascot being an astronaut, with or without the cowboy hat and the bandana, brings up the idea of baseball in outer space. So, from a pure physics standpoint, what's it like playing baseball in outer space?
So to answer that question, normally a picture says 1,000 words. I think a YouTube video would do it even more justice. If you go out there on YouTube and you just kind of search for hilarious astronaut falls during the Apollo moonwalks, I think you'd be entertained and understand the physics of a not as ergonomic spacesuit and trying to play baseball in a 1/6 gravity environment on the moon.
All right. What position do you think a space cowboy is going to play?
So I would say, probably pitcher, but I can see the Griffey, the iconic Griffey picture right now where he's jumping up, robbing a home run. Imagine what that would look like on the moon. 1/6 the gravity, where you can leap and really you're not going to come down for a while. So I can see a good home run catch or a rob, in a spacesuit.
Could a baseball player jump out of the moon's gravitational pull?
Although you might, seem that like from TV and movies in Hollywood, so the moon has 1/6 the gravity of Earth. So, for example, like the life support system backpacks that were on the Apollo astronauts, on the Earth's surface, they're about 185 pounds. You go up there and you can easily walk around. So imagine trying to train with 185 pounds in gravity and then going to the moon. It's like, oh, I feel like I can get away with a lot more. And then that's where you get those YouTube videos. You kind of get a little bit extra confidence, and then you start moving around a little funny.
Now, we're right here, as I mentioned. We're across the street from Coors Field. Coors Field, notable for being in Denver, which is more than 5,000 feet above sea level. What are the parallels between baseball in outer space and baseball here at elevation?
So here at elevation, the air is a little bit thinner, so there's not as much wind resistance on that baseball, where the seams on the baseball can cut through with the rotations and create drag, right? Drag that would change the velocities and change the spins of the ball. You go up to the moon and there's no atmosphere. And so again, going back to Newton's laws of physics, once you throw an object and put it into motion, you put force on that object, it's going to stay in that motion, but at 1/6 the gravity of Earth. So it's going to be some funky stuff, and stuff that you would probably see, like Savannah Bananas may want to be interested in something like playing ball on the moon. Yeah, it would be interesting. So another thing you have to kind of factor in on the moon is the regolith. So when you go to slide, you're gonna slide a little bit longer, and it's gonna create a massive dust cloud.
But it sounds like baseball in outer space would favor the offense because the pitches aren't going to break, the ball's going to carry, and the outfielders can't move around as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine to kind of counter that, the gloves might be a little bit bigger.
Yep.
So your equipment might be bigger, a little bit different than what you're normally going to see here. The dimensions in the field, up here at Coors Field, the air is thin, the ballpark's a little bit bigger to kind of compensate for that.
Yeah.
But up there on the lunar surface, I have no idea how big that field would be. It could be huge. You hit that ball and it's just going to take off, and it might not come down for a while.
Well, okay, so I asked you about, could a baseball player jump out of the moon's gravitational pull? Could a baseball player hit a baseball out of the moon's gravitational pull?
Well, the Apollo capsules got back, right?
Yeah.
So I guess with enough delta V, they could definitely escape
right.
the atmosphere of the moon and get slingshotted back somewhere in space.
Now I want to go to the moon. It made me feel like I could actually play baseball better than I ever did. So, so as I mentioned, the work that you do is in Huntsville, Alabama, not too far, just down the road from Madison, and it's all, as you say, it's one big community down there, one big Rocket City community. You're at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Obviously, in this episode, we're talking about the Houston area, where you would find the Johnson Space Center. Who do you think would field the better baseball team?
Well, I'm kind of biased there, and I think Huntsville's got more athletes than down there at Johnson. If we fielded a baseball team and got to somehow play together, I think we might be saying, or the Johnson guys might be saying, Houston, we have a problem.
There you go. Well, now, are you going to be? Are you still pitching? Are you pitching for this team?
I don't know. Are we playing on the moon?
I
do not want to pitch on the moon. I like that gravity and the air drag of Earth.
Yeah, that's fair. That's going to work best for you, especially if you're throwing a curveball. Hey, what was your best pitch?
So I was not able to figure out how to throw a normal circle change. So I actually taught myself how to throw a screwball.
A screwball?
I would throw a screwball. So it was, as a right-handed pitcher, it almost looked like a left-handed curveball to the batters.
Oh, that's funny. So I asked about the Johnson Space Center versus the Marshall Space Flight Center. What about, since you have been on an episode about the Trash Pandas, a team made up of astronaut raccoons in trash cans versus a team of astronauts who are saddled with a bandana that is perhaps not Velcroed down and a cowboy hat that keeps floating away?
Well, I think although the trash panda is a very innovative and clever, adaptive, relentless creature, that you got to go with the mass. You got to go with the Space Cowboy, and especially if you're talking about Space Cowboys that are outfitted with the new Johnson Space Center Axiom spacesuits for the Artemis program that have a lot more ergonomics than what Alan Shepard was up there on the moon trying to hit a golf ball with, or the other astronauts like Charlie Duke trying to stumble over a rock. So I think the Space Cowboys would definitely come out on top against those relentless trash pandas with those modern suits that Johnson's been putting together for the Artemis program.
That's how come the Space Cowboys are AAA and the Trash Pandas are AA, right? Like
that's right. That's right.
I didn't mention, by the way, the Space Cowboys recently won the AAA championship, and we were there for it. Ranger Amy and I were there with
Vegas,
with
right?
some friends in Las Vegas to see them take down the Omaha Storm Chasers in the AAA championship game. That was an experience. That was a lot of fun to see them win that. Absolutely. And at the end there was a drone show, which I imagine took a certain amount of engineering as well.
I'm sure the algorithms and the flight software there was definitely an impressive show for you, wasn't it?
It was for sure. All right, Jay, one last question before I let you get out of here and we get back to Game 5 of the World Series. Given that this team is based on an astronaut baseball player, like we said, in a cowboy hat and a bandana, are there innovations that you would recommend for an astronaut baseball player wearing a spacesuit?
Well, I mean, you got to go with swag. These modern day baseball players, they're just full of swag. They've got the kitchen mitts on for sliding, but my favorite, the sun visors would be the ultimate swag. So I think you definitely have to add a really nice sun visor to that ergonomic spacesuit that's modern day to match these modern day baseball players.
Jay, this is amazing. This is so much fun. Where can people go to find the work that you're doing online? Where can people learn about the Artemis program? And what about maybe you on social media? Can people find you online?
Yeah, so the main NASA page, nasa.gov, is a good resource for a lot of things, including STEM outreach. We've got presence on Instagram. We've got presence on YouTube. We have a great YouTube channel. You can watch live launches. You can watch live feeds from ISS. We also have Facebook presence as well. It's not hard. NASA's been around for a while. You just do a quick Google search, and you could go off in the rabbit hole real quick.
That is fantastic. Jay, thank you so much. Hey, we'll see you next time you're in Denver, or the next time I'm in the Rocket City.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right, everyone. Welcome back. I am so pleased to have on Baseball by Design Jennifer Ross Nazell, who is a historian with the Johnson Space Center with NASA in the greater Houston area. Jennifer, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming on Baseball by Design to talk about the larger history of NASA in the Houston area. I have a real basic question. How is it that the Johnson Space Center came to be located in the greater Houston area?
Sure, that's a good question, and one that people often ask me. A lot of people say it was because of Lyndon Johnson, who our center is named after. But I really think it was because of Albert Thomas. That's probably not a name most people recognize. He was a member of Congress from this district for many years. And starting in the 1950s, he was asking the Atomic Energy Commission to build a facility on the site that NASA is on today. And they refused. He kept coming after him saying, hey, I have this free land. You might want to build, a reactor here. You might want to build a lab here. So when NASA was established in 1958, he was in charge of appropriations and in charge especially of NASA's funding. So he started asking NASA, wouldn't you like a facility here in Houston? But there weren't any plans to build a facility at that point. So our first administrator just kind of blew him off and said, no, I'm not interested. They were, though, building a center in Greenbelt, the Goddard Space Flight Center. And he actually threatened to withhold funding for that center unless he built it and moved it here in Houston. That didn't end up happening. But he was really working behind the scenes along with a lot of other boosters from the city of Houston, because of course, this is kind of like today getting an Amazon warehouse. There's a lot of money associated with building a federal facility. So a lot of people wanted to see NASA come here. So he was just really encouraging NASA to consider this. He actually reached out to our second administrator, Jim Webb, and he was definitely intrigued by the idea. There was actually a site selection committee put together where NASA traveled around the country and looked at different sites, trying to figure out where would be the best location for this new human spaceflight center. And interestingly enough, Thomas had people come to Houston about a week prior to Kennedy's moon speech, which is very interesting. He even told people here in Houston, kind of keep this very quiet because we don't know what's going to happen, but hey, maybe we can have this NASA center here. So, very interesting history. But of course, I do have to tell you that there were some requirements that the site selection team was looking for. They wanted a DoD air base nearby. So we have Ellington Air Force Base. They wanted, a cultural city. They didn't want their community to come to some backwater location. So Houston sort of fit those categories. They wanted universities nearby because they needed a well-educated workforce. They needed good transportation. They needed an all-weather airport. Being in Houston, weather is pretty good. We're not getting snowed in on a regular basis. So there was also that free land that Albert Thomas had promised, and Rice University was going to funnel that through Humble Oil. So, it met all the requirements, checked all the boxes. So that's how we ended up with Houston.
Were there other spots that were serious contenders, or was it always going to be Houston?
Well, interestingly enough, Tampa actually ended up on top. There was an Air Force base, MacDill Air Force Base. They were going to close Strategic Air Command at that point, but they made a decision not to. And so Houston, which was second, ended up becoming the location of the Space Center. I'm not really sure Albert Thomas would have accepted Tampa being the location of the Space Center. So there was some discussion about that, and there was some members of Congress who weren't really thrilled with the idea of Houston being here. But lots of people. Our first administrator, for instance, knew immediately when this plan was announced that it was going to Houston. He had no doubt in his mind.
So there was never a chance then that we would have had the Tampa Bay Astros in Major League Baseball and
I don't think so.
maybe the Houston Devil Rays, I guess. So
I don't think so. Albert Thomas was pretty powerful, and whatever he wanted, he ended up getting, and he got this.
So obviously, I mean, NASA's a huge part of that community. There are now 2 baseball teams named for the fact that the aeronautics industry exists there the way it does. Obviously, the Houston Astros are there. We have AstroTurf because of the Houston Astros. And then now the Sugar Land Space Cowboys, formerly the Sugar Land Skeeters. So they were named for mosquitoes before. Now they're named for the space industry. So probably an improvement so far as the greater Houston area is concerned. But obviously, I mean, NASA is a huge part of the community with the science that's being done there. But what's the role that if you're a resident of that area, what role does NASA play in your life?
Yeah, well, in the Clear Lake area especially, we are definitely the heart and soul of this region. If you just look around, you see NASA everywhere. It's not just the Space Center. It's everywhere. There is a car. I live in the Clear Lake area. There is a car that someone put a space shuttle on top of. It's a space shuttle car. He'll be driving around the area. It's very interesting. I've always wanted to stop him and ask him, like, why did you decide to put the space shuttle on top of your vehicle? You see elementary schools named after astronauts, like Ed White in Seabrook. We have Ed White Elementary. We have highways named after astronauts, like Deke Slayton. There's a highway in League City, a cancer center named after him. So, we are really the heart and soul of this region. But we play an even bigger role. Of course, we have a huge economic impact, not only on the Clear Lake region, but the city of Houston and then also the state of Texas. If you look at figures, NASA has I think the last figures I looked at, because of NASA being in Texas, there have been 52,000 jobs created, nearly $5 billion added to the Texas economy as a result. So, I mean, huge impacts. The impact on education is immeasurable. We have Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston. They receive about $8 million in grants from NASA. Rice University, one of the reasons that we ended up coming here to Houston, receives about $14.5 million in grants themselves. The University of Houston, they just received, I think it was $5 million from NASA to build an engineering research center on their campus. They've also received funding for looking at things like diversity in STEM fields and understanding why certain folks aren't coming into engineering and science and how they can reverse that and encourage more people to do so. So, I think it's a huge, it really has a huge impact, not only on the area, like I said, but the state economy as well and the city of Houston.
Well, so that leads into another question that I had, which was the greater Houston area, Houston, and obviously this episode is about Sugar Land. It's become synonymous with space travel and popular culture, movies, TV shows, now even a couple of baseball names. How does that mesh with the work that's being done at the Johnson Space Center and the work that you do every day?
Well, the work that I do every day is very different from the work that most people do on center. Most of the people who work here are scientists and engineers. I'm kind of the odd woman out, so to speak, being a historian. But most of the people who work here, oh, and we also have obviously astronauts and flight controllers. Um, but obviously we continue to do the work that we've been doing for many years so successfully, which is flying in space. We are the lead center for human spaceflight, and so we continue to fly astronauts into space. We've got ISS expeditions. We've got Expedition 72, I believe, in space right now. They just went up last month. They're scheduled to come back in spring of 2025. We have our commercial crew that's regularly being sent up to the International Space Station, also to do research in space. Our flight control teams are monitoring them 24/7 from mission control. All of our trainers are working with these astronauts to make sure that they are trained and ready for flight. And of course, we have an Artemis crew, Artemis 2. They are working on training for that mission, getting ready to circle the moon. And they are working with people like geologists and people who are developing instruments that are actually going to be taken to the moon, placed on the moon by the astronauts. So there is a lot going on here at the center. There's more than that. That's just sort of, our operational aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely what you see on things like, Space Cowboys and other films like that, that's definitely what we do at the Johnson Space Center.
So this team actually is called the Space Cowboys, and their logo, and this will be my last question for you, and then I'll let you get back to your important work that you're doing. The Space Cowboys logo has an astronaut in a very a modern, futuristic looking astronaut suit, and then he's wearing a cowboy hat. Have you ever seen, being in Houston, someone in an astronaut suit also wearing a cowboy hat?
No, but I would like to. I think I'm going to go check out that path. I know that it reminds me, you're describing of this to me, reminds me of a poster that I love that I haven't seen it in a while, but it's a picture of Ed White and it says Texas still in the frontier business. So that's really what it reminds me of. So I think that's great because, we can go back to President Kennedy's speech that he gave in 1962 here at Rice University, talking about how Houston was going to be this amazing location for space, and it used to be the furthest outpost on the western frontier, and now it was going to be the furthest outpost on space, or something like that. We'd have to go back and look at the exact language.
Well, the Space Cowboys are fresh off their AAA championship. I was there in Las Vegas when they won the AAA championship. I don't know if that was big news in the greater Houston area when Sugar Land won the AAA championship, but it was fun to be there and see them celebrate on the field. Jennifer, thank you so much. This has been really informative and really fun to learn about the history of NASA and to understand why this team would be called the Space Cowboys. I think people sort of understand that there's that relationship between the aeronautics industry, the space industry, and the greater Houston area. But I really appreciate you illuminating us on that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out.
Is there somewhere that people can go online to learn more about the history of the Johnson Space Center or NASA at large?
Yes, if they go to Google, they can type in JSC History Portal, or they can go to nasa.gov. We've got a history page out there too.
Fantastic. Jennifer, thank you so much, and best of luck in the future.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm so pleased, as always, to have my very good friend, Dan Simon, who has been in the news in recent months with some excellent rebrands that have been out there, the Columbus Clingstones, the brand new Oklahoma City Comets, who we will feature in an upcoming episode. I'm so lucky to get to talk to Dan, who is on the forefront of minor league baseball design work. Dan, good morning. How are you?
I am fantastic, Paul. This is certainly a fun time of the year for me. For those of you who don't know, and for those of you who do know, you're just going to hear it again. My new minor league baseball brand identities cannot be unveiled until the last day, I think the last home game. No, I think the last day of the minor league season. So the team cannot unveil it before then. Most teams do not unveil it quite that early because you're talking about the end of August or the very beginning of September, right around there. But they start to get released. What do they call it? Logo-vember or something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
Logo-vember,
So
which used to be a bigger thing than I think it is now because of schedules have gotten a little bit upended in the shakeup of minor league baseball.
Well, but so in that time period from, the beginning of September running through sort of the end of the year is when all of these new identities for the upcoming season get unveiled. And a lot of teams like to do it earlier in that time span than later so that they have product in store in their shops for the holiday season. We develop these brand identities so far in advance, literally they're done more than a year before they actually take the field. And so it's ancient history when I finished the designs of this stuff, and you got to sit there and bide your time. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that stuff.
Yeah.
But we've got stumpers to do.
We
So
have a stumper on the Sugar Land Space Cowboys today. One of the first brands that came out, if not the first brand that came out, sort of in this new era of Major League Baseball's control over minor league baseball. So that's sort of interesting and designed in-house by the Astros team there. This is sort of a notable brand in that regard.
well, you often ponder which direction the Studio Simon Stumper might go in.
Yeah.
Now, for those who are fans of classic rock, the Steve Miller Band had a 1969 release. I believe it was, I can't even tell you which album it was on, but of course, the name of the song is Space Cowboys, something you tune into classic rock station, you'll still hear today. But we're not going in the music direction. Rather, we are going to pay a visit to Dan's Movie Corner.
That's a shame because I thought I was going to have an opportunity to bring up the fact that Ranger Amy and I just went and saw Men at Work in Denver at the Paramount Theater in Denver. Got to see Colin Hay and an entirely new band that has nothing to do with the old Men at Work band. But since we're not talking about music, let's go to Dan's Movie Corner.
Okay. So here we're going to go right into the Studio Simon Stumper today, which asks or begins with, okay, all three of the following actors starred in the major motion picture Space Cowboys, which came out in 2000. Two of them also starred in a baseball movie. Which one did not? Was it A, Donald Sutherland, B, Tommy Lee Jones, or C, Clint Eastwood? All starred in the movie Space Cowboys, but only two starred in a separate movie a baseball movie.
Okay, so Clint Eastwood, and it wasn't the same baseball movie. It could be any baseball movie.
It could be or may not have been.
I see. Okay. Well, so I know for a fact that Clint Eastwood was in Trouble with the Curve. So
You are correct.
Clint Eastwood was in a baseball movie. So that brings it down to Tommy Lee Jones and Donald Sutherland. And I can absolutely picture Tommy Lee Jones. I know Tommy Lee Jones. Donald Sutherland, I'm having a little bit of trouble picturing him right now exactly. But I have the idea that he was in Major League. And so I am going to go with Tommy Lee Jones.
I am surprised
Oh boy, here we go.
that you did not know this. Now, you
I
were
always feel so judged.
well, I would figure that anybody who is a big enough baseball fan that would do a podcast specific to baseball, and frankly, those listeners who would listen to a podcast like this, if you're listening to a baseball centric podcast or doing a baseball centric podcast, or you're just a big baseball fan, I kind of assume you've seen many, if not all, of the baseball movies out there.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not a safe assumption to make. So you were correct right off the bat, no pun intended, that Clint Eastwood starred in Trouble with the Curve. Now, that was a more recent film that came out in 2012.
Okay.
To me, that's, even to some people, that's half a lifetime away. To me, that's recent. The movie that Tommy Lee Jones starred in came out in 1994. How old were you in 1994, Paul?
I would have been a junior in college, living my wildest college junior life, playing midnight football, playing in the pep band, that sort of thing. Not going to Tommy Lee Jones movies, probably. Tommy Lee Jones.
Okay. Well, I did go to this movie. I believe I saw it in the theater because it was a baseball movie and I wanted to see it. He was in the 1994 major motion picture Cobb, in which he was completely miscast as Ty Cobb. And when I say completely miscast, Tommy Lee Jones is one of the finest actors, not only of our time. I consider him one of the finest actors ever. Love him in just about every movie he's ever been in. But he was cast as Ty Cobb, and he does not even bear a passing resemblance to the Georgia Peach. So, anyway, now, coincidentally, speaking of baseball movies here in Dan's movie corner, that movie, Cobb, was written and directed by Ron Shelton, who also wrote and directed, any idea what well-regarded baseball movie he also wrote and directed?
Major League.
Bull Durham.
Bull Durham.
Okay. Now, regarding Major League, you said you pictured Donald Sutherland in Major League. I did go through his filmography to see if he was in some baseball movie that I was not aware of. I don't remember seeing Major League. So
I Googled it, and I was confusing Donald Sutherland with James Gammon. I thought maybe Donald Sutherland was the manager there, but James Gammon is the manager. Also of one of my favorite underrated movies, Cabin Boy.
Okay, well, Donald Sutherland is probably not somebody one would associate, or not an actor one would associate with baseball, either by being in baseball movies a la Kevin Costner, or being, known for being a big baseball fan. Like Rob Lowe is a major Dodger fan.
Jason Bateman.
Jason Bateman as well. Paul Rudd is a big Kansas City sports fan, Royals, Chiefs, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
However, Donald Sutherland is Canadian. He was born in St. John, New Brunswick. He grew up in Nova Scotia and had a home in Quebec. And in doing my research, I learned he was actually a big, big fan of the Montreal Expos. So he didn't appear in a baseball movie, but big baseball fan.
Well, I learned a thing this morning. I'll tell you what, I have very little familiarity with that 1994 Tommy Lee Jones movie, Cobb. I certainly never saw it. Would you recommend it? Should I watch it?
Well, that's that. The answer to that, I won't go on too long about it, but that book I'm sorry, the movie is based on a book by an author, if I remember correctly. His name is Al Stump. And I read the book, and the movie is consistent with the book, and the book is not kind at all to Ty Cobb. Now, written history and oral history has not been kind to Ty Cobb. And whether that's justifiably so or not, it's hard to say for me to confirm, because I wasn't there to witness it. But he is regarded as kind of a jerk, and a racist, and other bad things that people who are known to do. However, there has been reporting since Al Stump's book came out and the subsequent movie version based on his book, that some of the things about Ty Cobb might not have been true. One of the things I think he's most famous for is beating up a heckler in the stands who, it turns out, had no hands. He went in and got into a fisticuffs fight, and turned out this heckler had no hands.
Yeah.
Again, whether that's true or not, we've heard it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so regarding the movie, like I said, it's kind of weird seeing Tommy Lee Jones playing Ty Cobb. He plays him as both a young player and then retired. So seeing Tommy Lee Jones playing, a very young Ty Cobb, it's just not believable. So again, that movie came out in 1994. I probably saw it, like I said, in the theaters. So what? It's been 30 years since I've seen it. I don't know that. Heck, if it was good enough to recommend, I would have remembered and I would have said I recommend it. It's not a horrible baseball movie, but I wouldn't put it on your must-see list. If it's ever on TV or something and you see it, watch it and judge for yourself. Let me know what you think.
65% on Rotten Tomatoes. So
not a great score. Hey, Baseball by Design listeners, let us know if you have any opinions of that movie, and so Paul can tell me.
Dan, thank you very much for all the hard work you do coming up with these studio assignment stumpers every single week. And I look forward to speaking to you again next week with another studio assignment stumper. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.
I thank you, and I hope you have an even better week. See you next week, Paul.
You're always one-upping me.